I know we've talked in the past about the red state teachers strikes that took place in, I guess it was last year now, in 2018. You, of course, got Red State Revolt, what the teacher strike wave means for workers, and politics is coming out in a couple of months. We have this massive teacher strike in Los Angeles right now. Just for context's sake, give us a sense of what took place over the summer, because we really have there's almost like you could almost at this point build a triptych, right? We have the Chicago teachers strike, which I think was back in 2011 or 2013. And we have these wave of strikes that took place over more or less over the summer in 2018, maybe not so much the summer, but maybe the fall. In the spring. And now we have this LA teacher strike. Put this teacher strike into context, in that broader context.
Right. The underlying issue really in all of the different strikes you mentioned is austerity and privatization. These are policies that have been imposed by both Democrats and Republicans since, in particular, the Great Recession, but in some ways going back decades. And the form that the strikes have taken, the rhythms, the general struggle around public education, it's looked different depending on the political and economic context. So it started in Chicago as a direct confrontation with Arne Duncan, Rahm Emanuel, the real corporate Democrats. But the form that it took just last year, as you mentioned, in West Virginia and Arizona and Oklahoma, were these red state revolts in which unions were relatively weak, in which public sector strikes are illegal, and it gave it a somewhat more explosive, spontaneous, chaotic form. Los Angeles, I would say, is both a reflection of the struggle against the similar type issues, low pay, privatization, underfunding of school, high class sizes. These are commonalities across the whole United States. In some ways, it's more like the Chicago strike insofar as it's a deep blue state. California has been long run by Democrats. The type of policies that have been imposed by Democrats. And so it's a challenge to a real establishment Democratic machine in Los Angeles and the types of reform, charter, privatization policies they've imposed. And the flip side is that it's a legal strike. It's a strike led by a very strong union, UTLA, and that gives a different type of struggle than I think we saw in the spring of last year.
All right, and so this is it's a fascinating juxtaposition, because I think immediately when you hear about Los Angeles, you just presume, well, I mean, this is California. This is an incredibly blue state. There should be no question about this. Now, let's juxtapose it a little bit with Chicago. Chicago was very much at the heart of this split between on the sort of the center left, right? I mean, the far right and on the right, we have this very explicit desire to privatize and attack public education. On the center right to center left, ostensibly this is to improve the concept of public education, but is very much about privatization and in many respects about race. At least in the context of Chicago. Seen in that context, where would you place this LA teacher strike?
Yeah, that's a good question. The first thing to say is that you're right. This has been a policy pushed by both Republicans and Democrats in somewhat different ways. So the Democrats in places like Chicago and Los Angeles, when they make the case for charters, it's generally with the rhetoric of equity. So the idea being that regular public schools haven't been serving underprivileged communities, which is more or less code for Black and brown communities, and therefore we need something better, something that really is going to be able to break out of the status quo. So the way it was framed for all these years was that somehow this was really an act on behalf of working class communities of color. And the reality, as the data has shown, is that charters don't in fact improve even test scores, which parenthetically is I'm a former teacher, and most teachers would agree that this isn't even really a valid metric for whether learning conditions and education is actually improving. But even on that level, charters have not done demonstrably better than public schools. And so the crux of the matter is that the solution for the real problems in public schools, I don't think anybody's denying those, is full funding. It's exactly what the LA teachers and the Chicago teachers were demanding, which was the schools that Chicago students deserve are now in LA the schools that Los Angeles students deserve. And so the solution is better funding, more class room help, more nurses, more counselors, wraparound services. And I think you can think of the strikes in that sense as two forms of anti-racism. There's this anti-racism from above of the corporate reformers, and there's a working class anti-racism that I think really does a better job of advancing the interests of communities of color on the ground.
Now, we should say, it's interesting because the question of charter schools just came to the forefront a little bit in the context of Elizabeth Warren's run and this guy, Jonathan Chait, who is a longtime sort of, I guess, center-left, ostensibly, writer who was touting the success of charter schools in Massachusetts. And there is some validity to the claim that charters have performed well in Massachusetts. Massachusetts, of course, is fairly unique in how stringent they control charter schools, how firmly placed under the auspices of public schools these charters are. And there's also a lot of data to suggest that the quality of the public education system is the foundation for the success of charter schools in specific states. There's a significant amount of data to support that. In the context of California, we have seen the biggest assaults on public education. When we talk about charter schools, it's not just a question, of whether they're effective. It's also the implications for the entire system, right? I mean, when we talk about their impact on public schools, because this is a drains money from the public school system.
Right. Yeah. So the dynamic with charters is that they, as you mentioned, drain funds from the public schools and put it into private hands, privately run schools. And the flip side is that it creates a cherry picking mechanism. So you have in places, including in Massachusetts, but in LA as well, it's understandable that if schools are being underfunded, you're going to have some parents who are proactively trying to get their students a better future. They're going to go out of their way to try to find a better school. And so if charters seem like that, in a given context, it's going to be better than the neighborhood school, they will go there. And so what you have then is charters picking off some of the best and brightest, at least because of the promise that they are able to give. And in turn, there's a lot of research confirming this. And actually the ACLU and others have sued LAUSD in California generally, because the charters can cherry pick students, not just based on their ethnicity, but also in particular around disabilities. So they're not forced to deal with really providing education for the whole gamut of the people of the given city or state. And that's one of the reasons actually why the danger of charters is so strong, because what they want to promote in Los Angeles, like they've done in other cities, is basically splitting up the district into competing networks. So you would have, sort of slivers of different schools competing with each other for resources. And those that don't make it based on, market fundamentalist principles will get closed. And so it's what used to be a right for all then becomes a right just for a few.
All right, Eric, we got to take a quick break. When we come back, let's get a little more granular with these strike issues and talk a little bit about this education reform movement. I'm Sam Seder. This is Ring of Fire Radio. We'll be right back.